Welcome to What Works for Women at Work. I'm your host, Evelyn Axelrod, and this season, I'm talking to bold and accomplished women who are ready to spill the secrets to their incredible success. Come join me and unlock the doors to your leadership breakthrough. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to What Works for Women at Work. Today, we are joined by Jessica Ketwaroo-Green, a special friend of mine. It's been maybe a decade now that we've maybe a little less, but we have been in each other's lives for quite a while now, Jess. And you've been a mentor to me in all of the things that you've been doing, especially around equity. Can you tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. And I think maybe it's been close to a decade. I can't remember now. Nonetheless, Eve, you are a mentor to me. And I think that's how our relationship first started. And in terms of your question, what I've been up to, I have been doing all the things equity, starting with working at Fleming College as the manager of equity there and supporting the college in crafting a new culture, new approaches, new practices, new sort of ways of thinking. Also been running a equity-based consulting firm. So really looking at supporting the nonprofit sector in their capacity, in building their capacity to address equity from a nonprofit lens, knowing that the dynamics are definitely different between sectors and across sectors. But before that was doing a lot of research and public policy work, which we know is super intertwined with equity work, equity practices, and organizational development. So that's what I've been up to. I think one of my biggest successes in this equity work has really been to help people think about equity in a different way. So what I mean by that is I think a lot of people chalk up equity to be political correctness, having a right way, a limitation of freedom of speech or freedom of expression, which is what we have here in Canada, and this feeling of limitation. And so my biggest success in this work isn't necessarily preaching or supporting the people who have already agreed with these principles and are acting them out, but it's talking to people who might feel a little resistance, or who might agree with these things in principle, but not necessarily on how they're executed or how they're delivered. And so having these types of conversations with people who want to avoid equity or individuals who agree with equity, but not how equity is achieved, having them come to terms with or having them have a greater or deeper understanding of different ways of thinking about what equity really means, and what equity means for our futures, for them, for our organizations, for our society at large. And having and supporting those people through that process, because it's uncomfortable going through a process where you're unlearning or relearning things that you've believed for so long. And it's not usually a process that happens overnight or with one conversation, but with ongoing coaching, support, and deep reflective conversation, we truly can see, or I truly have seen, people start to question things more. And that for me is always a great success in these types of in this type of work, because it takes a lot out of me as the person leading and supporting those people. And that has always been my big obstacle in terms of doing equity work. I think only recently I've come to realize a couple things, which is you can't get them all. You can't change them all, and nor do I think equity work really should be based in that way. I can't. I always had this, and I I always had this experience or thought that, I'm gonna change the whole world in my lifetime. And I think that coming into the working world, and Eve, when you first met me, you probably would have seen that energy in me when I first started working and holding this belief. And it's not that don't still hold that belief of the possibility of that. I think what's changed in me is that it's not only going to take me, it's going to take me and others. And so going back to a little bit into my successes, um, and going back a little bit into my success and the obstacle is that I've stopped trying to support people who don't want support. I've stopped thinking that it's just going to be me who's, I'm the single hero and I'm going to save the whole world. And another piece or component is really just having an understanding that it's going to take a group of us and wanting to bring people together to address these big societal questions that we have and these big societal problems that we're all trying to address. Because that mindset has helped me with my obstacles because before that I was with those mindsets. um I went into burnout, and Eve, you know this quite well, but I was doing too much and I was operating in a way where I thought my body was a machine. And I forgot about my own humanity in this process because I believe so deeply, so strongly in this change that I wanted to see cultivate to the point where I couldn't do work anymore. And I've been burnt out twice as long as I have been than I was in doing the good work that I felt was actually making change. So, um, all of these things are hyper connected, but it's really taken a mindset shift to be able to address my obstacles. And my obstacles are most connected to my successes. Because when you get over that hump, I think though for me those are the real great points of success.
Yeah, they're great points of learning. Um,
Hmm.
when you reflect back on, oh my gosh, the struggles that you've been through,
Hmm.
and you realize there's another way of looking at it, it changes everything, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Perspective is a huge piece in this work. And I think perspective is really the core and the base of equity. Whose lens are you viewing? Are you using to view a problem, a situation, a what somebody said? So you're right, perspective is key.
yeah. So you've had a really beautiful career. I mean, you've worked for provincial associations, you've worked twice, I believe, doing gender equity as well. You've worked for cities and governments. Um, so and now you're in post-secondary education. So you've spanned the gamut of these sectors. As you reflect back on your career, as a woman trying to grow in your career, what was some of the things that you were initially told about what's important to women's leadership compared to what you now know and no one told you?
Hmm, a lot. And I think that in part, um, the conversation around what women's leadership in the workplace, what it looks like, has shifted in the last few years, which is great. But when I was entering the workforce, it was really conversations around imposter syndrome, confidence, believing in yourself, which is all true and great because, as Eve knows, I still struggle with some of these feelings of lack of confidence or lack of assurity in my sort of next steps and things of that nature. But those pieces don't make up the whole puzzle. They don't make up the whole image. They're just two or three small pieces within a greater picture of things. I think ageism is one of the things that I experience or bump up against the most. I look like I'm 21, which I don't dislike for myself. I think that's a great thing. But when you're in the workplace, unfortunately, when you look young, you're treated differently. And so I have had to go into workplaces or spaces and speak very articulately to assert my intelligence, to assert my maturity, to assert my knowledge and expertise in a vocal way. I've also had to change the way that I dress, which is interesting because in a lot of these workplaces, they're very casual, either very casual workplace attire where people are in jeans and running shoes and just a t-shirt, but I'm there with a blazer on and dress pants and high heel shoes. And that's one thing that I've implemented to demonstrate to people outwardly that take me seriously. Because if I show up in jeans and a t-shirt and I talk to you in the casual way without boisterous language, I'm not going to be taken as seriously. And so those are the conversations that I think we need to be having with our young people, with women in general, because I think that they're definitely something that we all acknowledge and we might adjust ourselves for, but we're not having these big conversations about A and B, what are we doing so that we don't have to adjust who we are in the workplace to better accommodate other people's feelings or perceptions of us. Um, and so those are the types of conversations that I would like to see people have in the workplace. Um, those are the types of conversations I would like to see us have when it comes to women connecting. Um, I also think that in these types of conversations, we lack sometimes the capacity to uh, analyze what our skill sets are, and where we might be able to improve. When you look at the way what men's mentorship looks like, and the way women's mentorship looks like, a lot of women come to these conversations with, how do you do work-life balance? And it's a really frustrating piece because yes, work-life balance for women is a super important conversation because as much as we are advancing in leadership roles, we're also staying very stagnant at home. Um, those are conversations that don't need to be in the workplace if you're trying to advance because you'll figure it out. Have a conversation with your partner, with the people who you're caring for, hire help. There are so many options there. But when you're in the workplace and you're trying to advance yourself in the workplace as a leader, what I think is missing from these conversations is self-awareness, analytical thinking in terms of, and applying those two things in terms of what are my skill sets? How can I improve? Where are there projects or initiatives or opportunities to be able to leverage this skill set and improve? I also think that when you're in the workplace and you're working with other leaders, you also have conversations where those other leaders can support and identify opportunities for you to be able to advance in your skill sets. And I think that that's what's missing in these types of conversations. It's not necessarily, let's discuss all the sort of bigger societal problems, but let's take a look at you, Eve. Let's take a look at me. Where do we want to see our career? What skills are we missing to get there? How can I support you in getting to those skills? And what do I need to do for myself to be able to get to those skills? And that's where we see a really big change in the way women approach leadership and career development and men. And that's definitely, I think, a conversation that I think we need to be having more explicitly um, in these types of circles.
Wow. Jessica, that you have just like spoken my mind. You have, and there's so many questions I have around the things that you brought up here. I'll start with the last one first. I mean, it's interesting to hear you share this because, the work and the space that you are trying to tackle are the systemic things that are broken and trying to find, like, from the big picture, the macro level, what are the
Mhm,
things that we can change? And I've been sort of struggling to find a balance between the macro and the micro because I think there's individual, um, not just responsibility, but like you said, awareness from an individual woman and how she shows up in the workplace, and how she builds out her career. So what you're talking about is how do you take on those individual projects? How do you develop those skill sets that you know are going to make a difference in your career? For me, those things are important. And how do you articulate those skills that you have them, that you demonstrate them in the way that you show up and people recognize your value and do want to speak on your behalf, and say, I think Jessica will be wonderful for this project. I've seen her do magic with these numbers, for example, and I know she'll be able to add value. So, thank you for sharing that because it has been a struggle for me, um, being a leader in especially nonprofit space and saying, yes, I know the system's broken. And there are really good people like Jessica and Belinda that I just interviewed and others who are working on this big systemic, structural changes that we need to make. But I want to support you, the individual, in how you develop the skills, know the skills that you have, and then articulate the skills. And I think those pieces are really severely missing because we can
mhm,
deal with the macro, but if we're not dealing with the micro, we can't scale.
mhm.
And so I think that's really important. I want to go back to the thing that you first said about the way you, as a woman leader, show up in the space, especially a young professional, and wanting to be taken seriously and not dismissed when you're dealing with ageism. And so hearing you say that also, I mean, coming from a place where you come from, Jess, and you're talking about bring your whole self to work
Mhm.
and being authentic at work. How do you reconcile those two things when you have to be a certain persona at work?
I think I have a little bit of a contentious opinion on this. And that's because I've, after my experience of burnout, I've come to sort of sever this relationship between work being everything I am and me. So as a result of that severing, which has, by the way, done wonders to my mental health. I no longer see myself, um, or needing to bring my full self into the workplace. It's not, work is not who I am, what I am, why I'm here. And because of that, what I show in the workplace is different and you might not want to be authentic there. And that's not a space that sometimes you need to be completely who you are outside of the workplace in the workplace. There are lots of small other examples I could think of, but again, your personality can still come through. I still want you to be, I'm a very outspoken person. I still show up as a very outspoken person in the workplace, but I also then recognize the hierarchies that exist. And while I'll share my perspective, but still have to respect that they're not my partner and they don't have to take my decision or my perspective. And that there are many ways in which you can challenge these sort of macro level pieces in the workplace in a micro level. Um, but you don't have to be 100% the same person in the workplace and outside,
I
and
agree.
you can bring some of those pieces together.
Yeah, I think we do need to stop thinking in extremes.
Hmm.
And I think there is false narrative around bring your whole self to work and be fully authentic. I mean, you can be authentic in the moment that you are required. You're being, I mean, how else would you be? You wouldn't be a mother in a boardroom. You have
Hmm.
a part of yourself. And I think it's okay to celebrate those different parts of yourself. And the appropriate part shows up where it is appropriate to do so. And I think I can bring my whole self or my whole identity to work, as in, a wife, a daughter, a Trinidadian, a cis woman, all those things I can bring as my identity, and it should be welcomed. And I should feel I belong in those environments, but I shouldn't be expected to bring all my cultural, luxuries or my cultural things that make me up or my big personality, because I always say to you, I'm rather childish and funny in my personal life, but
I can confirm.
and how could I possibly be appropriate in that way at work? I can be funny. I can, like you said, have some jokes and lighten the mood, but that would not necessarily, like, the Eve at home is not the Eve that's needed at work. And I think we
Mhm.
just need to embrace that adaptability and be adaptable to the environments that you are in the moment, without saying, I can't be authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think you've actually summed up what I was trying to come to a lot better. I did not want to, and I do not believe that whatever your identity is isn't welcome in the workplace. I definitely think that it is. Whether you're queer, you're indigenous, you're black, you're racialized, you're a newcomer, whatever it is, you should be welcome in the workplace. And whatever parts of your identity that you want to bring into the workplace should be welcome. And we need to make space for that. I think what I'm trying to get at is different positions, whether it be the workplace, whether it be your role as a mom, as a daughter, as a sister, as a friend, as a mentor. They expect you to have different callings. They expect you to show up in different ways, and that's what we need to recognize, and then recognize, okay, the core of who you are is here. But what am I going to take from here in my workplace role? What am I going to take from here in my motherly role? What am I going to take from here in my sisterly role or as my role as a wife or whatever it might be? So that's I think the core of what I'm trying to say is that you are who you are, and we want to make sure that workplaces are welcoming all the pieces that you want to show and share and make present. But you also have to recognize that who you are at the core isn't always appropriate, or needed in every aspect of your life, wherever it might be.
absolutely. Absolutely. So Jess, you've come a long way in your career, and you've grown quite a bit. And like you said, it hasn't been easy. You have experienced burnout already in your career, and many of us have. What advice do you have to share around staying motivated, especially during difficult times?
Oof. Oh gosh. Motivation is me and motivation go together sometimes like oil and water. Um, and it's it's a hard feeling to hold on to. And for much of the beginning of my career, I was completely reliant on motivation to get things done. Um, and that can put you in a very precarious position because all of a sudden you're signed up for all of these things and you agreed to participate in all these projects and you no longer have the motivation to do it. And especially dealing with experiences of burnout, it was hard to find the motivation. And so what I did was took a step back and I reevaluated in terms of what is core. What are the core things that I need in my life to feel a sense of fulfillment? And that is what I'm looking at. Fulfillment is this bigger, deeper, longer term feeling that doesn't necessarily change all that much on the day to day, but can be more consistent when you look at the bigger picture of things. And I've always been a bigger picture type of person. Taking a step back on I've had a hard day in this project and this funder dropped out and now, the whole, so, you take a step back and you look at the bigger picture and you need to understand, how do you seek fulfillment? How can you feel fulfilled in your life? And that is what's kept me motivated. I wouldn't say motivated because there are days where I'm just like, oh, I just want to lay in bed all day. And I think that's just the reality of being human too. Um, and the reality of also the society we lived in, this capitalism and the need to always work, 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 buy, 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 and that's our sense of fulfillment. So I was in that sort of loop, and I took a step back and I looked at again the piece of fulfillment, and I thought about what was important for me. And for me, I defined personal buckets in terms of what are the emotional things that I need? How will I emotionally be filled? How will I mentally be filled? How will I physically feel fulfillment? How will I spiritually feel fulfillment? And then what work do I need to be doing to feel fulfilled and like I'm living in my purpose? I've been blessed to know that, blessed to have the knowledge of what it is my personal sense of purpose is. So I also sort of at the baseline, when I'm looking at all these different areas that I mentioned, I use that purpose sometimes to be able to then fill into those cups, or sort of view a lens or place that my purpose lens on each of these cups. Now, in some of them, I don't necessarily use. For example, emotional. That is just my emotions and how I feel on things. Or spiritually, I definitely disconnect. In some ways, disconnect that from my spiritual cup. But I think the bigger thing is really taking a step back, looking at the bigger picture, seeking fulfillment instead of short-term gratification. I think that is a persistent and pervadent problem within our world right now, is these quick wins instead of stepping back and thinking, okay, I need to get through this. Writing this terms of reference, which is something I did recently, I did not enjoy it. Terms of references are not the fun part of getting a group of people together. But I took a step back and thought, okay, I have to do this to be able to get to this bigger picture. And that's what keeps me going. It's having a bigger plan. And as part of my bigger plan, I also create strategies, 5, 10, and 15-year strategies. So I know where I'm going and I know how this one day might fit into a bigger picture again. I'm again very big picture girly over here. But how this one day, this one activity might fit into a larger piece of what it is I'm trying to accomplish down the road. And that sort of forward thinking vision, as one of my friends always refers to it, as a North Star. That North Star always keeps me aligned with, I don't like what I'm doing or I love what I'm doing, but I'm gonna keep going, no matter what.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It sounds like if you're thinking about your future self,
Hmm.
and in terms of everything that you having to do may not um, reward you in the moment, but may reward you later on. Uh, But even if it doesn't, it's a path forward, right? And you decide if it's a path forward or not too. I mean, like you said earlier, perspective is everything. So how you look on what you're doing right now could shift based on your perception of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jess, what's next for you?
Great question. I actually just completed my, and if you know this, my Canadian Certified Inclusion Professional designation. So I'm finding time to celebrate that because I've always been okay, now this thing is done. Like, let's jump into the other thing. Um, so I'm celebrating that, but I have two things that I am working towards actively, which is a project management professional designation. Project management is something I've been doing for a long time, but didn't necessarily have the sort of frameworks that come with the PMP. So that's what I'm doing next. And a change management practitioner certification. Equity work is really all about the change management. So I'm certainly looking forward to those pieces. And then working on my business, we're going to be launching a few new courses. One of them being community-based research practices and supporting nonprofits in supporting people with lived experience in upskilling their capacity to participate in research and policy change and sort of that systemic change that I think is really key for a lot of nonprofit organizations. So I'm up to a lot, but having fun while doing it.
That's awesome. Wow, that is a lot. That is a lot. Wow, Jess. But it's all, like you said, filling those cups for you. So good to see you doing all of that. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me. You've shared so many insights, so many different, new, I think, ways of looking at things that our listeners could learn from. And I really appreciate you sharing all of that with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. It's been another episode of What Works for Women at Work, and we will see you very shortly. Take care.